All right, it looks like everyone submitted their votes, so I'm going to end the voting session. And this is how it played out there. So it looks like we got most of the votes went to LEDC and ECDC and WACIF, around the same, and NVS and Northern Virginia Family Services Scala, 3 votes. So let's move on to, and just so everyone knows who's on the call, I will send out a worksheet after this meeting that has a summary of all the votes that every organization received. So I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer and Laura to introduce the next session.
Okay, I will share again. So the next one is the non-public service housing. Oh, we get 3 votes, so you can vote for all of them, I guess. So Rebuilding Together, is the one that we've been funding for many years. It's the volunteer home repair.
So it should be 2 votes. Sorry, that should say 2. That was my mistake.
All right, so it'll be 2 votes. Eco Action, the Energy Masters program, which again, we've been funding for a number of years. They also asked for an increase. And LEDC, formerly AHOME, the Achieve Your Dream Homeownership Program. So any feedback or thought on those? Those have all been funded for a number of years.
They're all really good programs, and in today's world where the environment is so important, I think they even become more important.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else have any thoughts, feedback, concerns?
I think my comment on the Energy Masters program is we've seen that one a lot over the years, and it seems to me that it's kind of, they've sort of tried to pivot and kind of change their approach a little bit each time. I think the concern has kind of been, working with the multifamily apartment complexes, and once they've kind of gotten through that, they kind of, if I recall, you all can correct me if I'm wrong, they sort of shifted more towards the new build apartment complexes, which you might have argued that, is there really the same need for the filling in the gaps to conserve the energy and that kind of thing. And it seems like they've sort of moved around a little bit in what their focus has been, and I'm not exactly sure what direction they're really headed, and sort of what the focus is and where they can really make an impact. Given the new development that's coming in, which presumably is a little bit more energy efficient and all of that already.
Yeah, I know they work in like single family houses as well. They do some work with the county, but they didn't really ask for funding for that. So
it's not overall single family housing. It's really, they look for focused units. When I say that, I mean like a group home or, that kind of facility in order to apply any of their methods. So they are not at single family homes per se. So Laura, to your point, the focus is primarily in those new buildings, is sort of on education and more about the interior quality of the home, people managing their thermostat controls, and controlling the temperature in there to reduce mold and that kind of thing. So I think that's where their focus is, on the newer buildings, more education.
okay, well, I'll stop sharing, and Caitlin, if you want to whisk us back to mural, it sounds like we're ready to vote on this.
Sounds good. Great. Let me get the next voting session set up. All right, go for it. Right. And that is how the votes shook out. So about 9 for Rebuilding Together, 7 for Achieve Your Dream, and 2 for Eco Action. So I'm going to pass it back to Jennifer now for the next section.
Okay. I'm curious why Eco Action didn't get many dots. Anybody want to comment on why they may or may not have voted for them? Remember, your feedback is super helpful for us as we're developing recommendations, so.
I would just, I would just it's Margaret, that when they talked a little bit about kind of their outcomes, the outcome, I was looking in my notes to see, because I could have sworn I written it down, but I can't find it. But I think I remember that their outcomes were very, practical, from a true energy savings that they could acknowledge was like non-existent for the most part. And so they're in outputs, and although the outputs, aren't bad in terms of like numbers of people, they're not ginormous. And I just think at this point that I'd rather see organizations, if we're sort of supporting energy conservation and greenness, I'd rather be supporting organizations that are making a huge difference in terms of reduction of costs. And I think that that's actually working with the property owners. So.
Okay, thanks for that. Tim?
Yeah, I was just going to add a similar comment in that it is a challenge to understand the actual impact that they have, but the other piece that I would offer is that they are a bit more mature. They have been coming to us for the same exact program, same exact grant year after year. So unless I'm misunderstanding it, but I think it is basically the same program and the same grant that they've been coming to us for years for. I think if they're like a lot of the other nonprofits that we have worked with and have seeded here, I think they're ready to be sustainable on their own. And so those would be the two reasons I offer. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on those, or should we move on to the youth programs? All right.
I'm sorry. This is Brian. Just one reason I voted for what is it? The LEDC choice as my priority was looking at their application and specifically at their community needs section, them dealing specifically with middle income minority households, with Arlingtonians seeking to stay amidst rising house prices. I think having a home ownership program specifically geared towards low and moderate income households that also functions both in English and Spanish was really compelling, and they seem to have really good recommendations and partners in the community. So I think they, more than a lot of the organizations we were looking at, even though there were quite a few compelling applications, I think they really deserved the support.
Okay, thank you for that. That's really helpful. And I will say these two categories don't have caps in the way that the public service ones do. So the nice thing about these is it's easier to fund them than some of the public service ones. So now we're getting to the harder ones. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. We're going to skip the general and actually go to the youth programs first. Can you all see that? Can anyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the youth programs and educational attainment, there's quite a lot. There are usually a lot, but there are more this year. So just quickly, Aspire is The Learning Rocks program we've been funding for a number of years. They work with 3rd to 5th graders. And they did request a increase. They've had the same amount for a number of years. SIS of Nova is in its, I think, 3rd year, and that's the one that's the case management and family support within the schools. Project Discovery, again, we've been funding for a number of years, is helping first generation college students kind of learn about college, get there. Edu Futura has its Emerging Leaders program, requested a pretty significant increase because they also wanted to expand into some other programs. The Read Early and Daily is a new one, and that was the Read With Me Baby book bags. Liberty's Promise, we've been also funding for a number of years. They asked for a bit of an increase. And I think it's fascinating. The staff and SIDSAC score was pretty much identical on that. Bugatti, again, we've been funding for a number of years. That's for the Buckingham Youth Brigade, which serves high school kids in Buckingham. 2 new ones were the Arm in Arm program, which is for positive youth development working in Green Valley, and also the Bridges to Independence working on the Children's Development Community Program. And both of those are focused on youth in the Green Valley area. So we talked a little bit about that before, and did we think that was duplicative? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of those programs.
So I can chime in. I think the way that this is ranked based on how we all scored is pretty close to what my own scores. I was pretty impressed with the Read Early and Daily program. That was new to us, and I just thought, and especially given what they intend to do with a very small amount of money relative to all of the other requests, I was just pretty impressed with kind of how I guess kind of the research base behind it, and the sort of theory behind the program felt really, really strong to me. And then I this year, I know we've seen Liberty's Promise and Bugatti for years. For some reason this year, I really struggled with comparing those two, where I felt like the outcomes were, I know they're all very positive, but the outcomes felt a little bit less concrete, a little bit like the students are forming, friendships and relationships and building confidence, as opposed to some of the other programs like Aspire and CIS, where the outcomes were so much more concrete academic outcomes. So that's my 2 cents. Anybody else?
Yes, it's Steve. I was particularly impressed with CIS Nova for 2 reasons. One, because they have that MOU and they have the same access to the data that the teachers have. So, I mean, they are really in the system. So they really see what needs to be seen, and the schools obviously trust them a great deal to allow them that access. And also the fact that they do use so many volunteers, it's a great use of leverage of resources. So those 2 things, for me, knocked them way up.
Okay. So I will say I'm struggling a little bit with the Read With Me program. This is sort of putting on my bureaucratic hat. The outcomes are, the outcomes that match the consolidated plan, the one that comes closest is educational attainment. And I know that there's, documentation that, the younger you read, the higher your educational attainment is going to be. But just from the perspective of a 1-year grant, I don't know how they would count that. And so I'm kind of struggling with that. Like, is that really I don't know. How do we make that fit in with our consolidated plan is one way that I was struggling with it. Because I agree. I think it sounds like a great program. It sounds like they have their act together, but just, is it really appropriate for this funding? I guess is what I was struggling with. I don't know if anyone else has thoughts about that.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? So are you focused more on like how do we evaluate their progress within a year, since it's a 1-year grant, or what do you mean by how does this fit within the scope of the funding, our funding programs?
So yeah, so any grant that we fund needs to fit within the consolidated plan, and there is a
Right.
goal that's about, it's economic self-sufficiency is sort of the goal, and then the strategy underneath that is increase educational attainment. And so all these other ones were able to sort of fit that in, even if, as Laura said, some of them, or I think Steve said, some of them are more academically focused and some are more like leadership development, but we can still say, okay, that's educational attainment. Whereas this one, I don't know. I mean, I guess one of their measures was, you know, they have a lot of outputs, how many books they give out and stuff like that. And then the one measure that was really outcome based was that a certain number of parents, I think, feel more comfortable reading or read frequently or something like that.
Right, right.
Which is not really educational attainment. So I don't know.
Okay, I see now.
Tim, I think you have your hand up too.
Yeah, thank you. I was curious as to why B2I was so low. I honestly can't remember where I ranked them, but I'm curious to hear some thoughts from other committee members that perhaps were a little less enthusiastic, because Bridges is a great program, or a great organization rather. I was just curious as to why they may have ranked so low.
Tim, I'm looking at my notes and all I can say is it seemed to me that it was completely position oriented. They wanted to add another position, and which is maybe what they need to do, but that doesn't actually result in kids, getting where they need to be.
Yeah, okay. I'm recalling that now a little bit. Thank you, Mike. Yeah. Okay.
I believe they also had no letters of support from the community.
That's an oversight.
Yes, that's right.
I think that's right. So that knocks them down 5 points right there.
Yeah.
And I always take the letters of support pretty seriously because, like, I mean, you're putting together this pretty complex application for funding. Like, surely you can find some folks to, write a letter of support and vouch for you. And, to me, it feels a little bit like, don't skip that step.
Yeah, like it's kind of phoned in. Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments? Arm in Arm did not rank super high either. Any thoughts on that?
I actually had Arm in Arm a little bit higher, really just because it was Green Valley and the subject matter experts were saying how important it was because they are so closely tied with the police, and it's fairly unique in Green Valley. So that, again, it's that connection with the existing governmental services that I thought knocked them up a bit.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. They had really strong letters of support.
Yeah, I mean,
which
for me,
especially for a new organization, I agree. I think is super important.
Yeah, I mean, for me with Arm in Arm, it was I had a problem with their 990 and the where the costs were going. That was a concern to me. But
can you elaborate on that a little bit, Tim?
I mean, unless I was reading it improperly, I think that there was a significant chunk of the organization's revenue going to a single individual at Arm in Arm. Again, I may have been misreading their 990. It wouldn't be the first time I misread a financial document, but that was concerning to me. I think it was about 20. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. Just to that point, I was just kind of looking over the budget form they put forward, and yet the majority of the money that they're requesting, I think they're asking for $50,000 and $26,000 just going to personnel, which I guess is a little bit concerning there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment on that. I mean, the personnel, if it's direct program costs, I don't have too much of an issue with that, but I think the way I was looking at the organization, a lot of it was going to the executive director. And when an organization is providing, 15% of their total revenue to the executive director of the nonprofit, that raises a flag to me. And I'll have to go back and double check that. But if the programmatic costs are going to a person who are going to be administering the costs, it's one thing. But I don't believe that the executive director is a direct programmatic cost here. And that's part of the reason that I rated them so low. I can just speak for me. So hopefully that helps.
The only thing I will say to that is that sometimes in that, and I wished that I had paid more attention, because I'm right with you, Tim, on watching for that sort of thing, and asked at their presentation, but I didn't. Is that in these super small nonprofits, and perhaps ones that are also, more new, their executive director could be doing a lot of service provision as well. So in those circumstances where it's like a really working executive director, I have less of a concern about that proportion.
And I think that is true with this organization. I do think he does a lot of the sort of service stuff. And to the point about personnel, yeah, I mean, most of these grants, they pay for personnel. So it does sort of depend on who we're funding. I think that's a good point. Okay, are we ready to vote on these? Any other thoughts? All right.
Right. So I'm going to set up the voting session. All right, so I'm going to get started now. All right, we are all set. So this is how it shook out. Looks like CIS Nova got the most votes, and the fewest amount of votes went to B2Y and Liberty's Promise. So again, I'm going to send out a summary of all this once we are done tonight. All right, so Jennifer, I'm going to turn it back to you unless anyone has any comments about this category. Final comments. All right, sounds good. And I think we should do maybe, yes, the job training category next.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so there's quite a few this year and the job training too. So OAR is the Employment and Direct Services Program we've been funding for a number of years. They doubled their request this year. Same with La Cocina, Virginia, for their Job Training Entrepreneurship Center. NVFS for its Training Futures program. We've been funding that one for a number of years. CYEP Capital Youth Empowerment Program is the Fathers in Touch program, which they did ask for an increase. And if you'll remember, we've been funding this for a couple of years, and it was really kind of a case management sort of program. It's really much more focused on the employment piece this year. So that's why we kind of moved it into this category. Melwood Jobs is job training for people with disabilities. They've been funded. This is their first year of funding currently. They're currently getting 20,000. They asked for 50. Friends of Guest House, reducing barriers to employment. They are currently receiving 45,000 in AHIF, and their request is for 36.5. Extra points for asking for less. My Secure Kid is a new program. That was the one where a corporation is funding a sort of job training program for people who would end up working with them. The Bowers University of Crafts is the one where we never actually, they weren't able to come to a presentation. So that was a helping people to develop skills in construction and other jobs to get living wage jobs. So any comments, questions, thoughts on any of those?
I'm sorry, I had Bowers on hold, so I did not vote on that at all.
That's fine.
Like you didn't submit a score.
Right.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, no, the presentations are not required. So, yeah, unless we have a reason to pull an application, if they don't show up for their presentation, we still consider it in the competitive cycle.
Although it doesn't look like it scored very well anyway, so that's sort of moot. I found it a really not very well developed proposal. I didn't understand what they were doing or how or who they were partnering with.
Question on the My Secure Kid. Was that the one where we had a long discussion about?
Yeah.
Okay. I just wanted to remember because I remembered that, and I after I think we talked about that, I don't think this funding would be appropriate for what they're doing.
Okay.
But that's just my personal feeling. Like others might disagree, but I think what they're doing, it's smart, but I don't think it's I don't think I can support support the ethics of it, I guess.
So can you talk about what about it you don't support? Just the model,
the model of, they're just it's another way for them to get funds to train folks who are going to end up working for them, but they're using funds that could go to other organizations who really do need it. And it seems like, I don't know, it's versus all these other applications, I think they were towards the bottom. And that's just how I feel. So I think versus like OAR and La Cocina, like, I think it's clear, like for me at least, it was clear that those were better, more deserving and more qualified applications. And also their presentations, I just got kind of turned off by the people in charge there, to be honest with you. I was turned off by the presentation.
Okay, thanks for that. Other thoughts on that one?
No, but I think we had also had some discussion on the Friends of Guest House, and the whole issue that they were from out of Arlington and they were actually from Tidewater, and sort of the, is that, I mean, even though they're incarcerated here, is that really serving our community? So, and that, definitely made an impact on my decision making.
I think, and I'll just add to this. Sorry, Tim, I think you have your hand up, so I'll be quick. On that one, my personal guess, I don't know if this is true, is that this was sort of an unfortunate lack of clarification on in their application. My thought is that it may very well be folks from this area, whether it's Arlington specifically, who may be incarcerated elsewhere and are coming back to the area. But that's only a speculation because it wasn't clear in the application or in the presentation.
Yeah, and I don't think we asked them to clarify. I mean, I think what we talked about, I mean, the women's prisons are not in this area. I think there's one in the southwest and one in the south Tidewater area. So I think that the idea, Friends of Guest House is actually based in Alexandria, but they work in Northern Virginia, and it's really to support people who are coming back to this area, regardless of whether they came from here in the first place or not.
Yeah, just two things. I guess the first is that, is there an echo or?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Is it just,
Yes.
okay. Well, anyway, I was just gonna add, I think that, the way I understood the, women's prison, nonprofit was they were residents of Arlington, but they were elsewhere. Maybe I misunderstood that, but, which organization, remind me, was the one that was the nonprofit for the for-profit business?
My Secure Kid.
Yeah, yeah. I think I kind of opened that one up. I understand their mission, but I just would offer that I think that they could fund that through other means, that other organizations in this group may not necessarily have access to, given that they are a nonprofit that is run by a for-profit entity. I think that for-profit entity could afford to fund this program on their own. I mean, certainly the other nonprofits able to raise money. There's something to be said for that, but I just think that organization could probably, though I agree with the mission, I think the mission is very consistent with our consolidated plan. And at the end of the day, it's about helping people. I think that organization could find other ways to fund this program where other organizations on this list might not have access to. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Steve, did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to mention OAR. Many of the needs that we look at, there are various ways to approach it in various organizations working at different ways to approach the issue. But with OAR, as far as I can tell, they are really the only ones dealing directly with the folks coming out of the Arlington jail. And in a very selfish way, when they come out of the jail, I want them to be successful. I don't want them to be having troubles and end up back in the jail. And again, I come back to the community support and the very strong support from the Sheriff's Office, the Parole and Probation Office, and the Arlington Employment Center. So I was glad to see that they came fairly high up on the overall compilation of scores.
Yep, OAR always stands out to me as a program. It's just the on the rating that is demonstrate the need in the community. It's always the highest score for me.
Okay.
And as a side note on the My Secure Kid, I went and picked my kid up from daycare in Green Valley and looked across the street and saw the My Secure Kid logo on the building across the street. So I do know that it exists, which I don't think anyone has doubted.
It's always good to confirm though, right? Okay, any other thoughts on this? Or are we ready to vote on these? All right.
Okay. I will get the voting session started. All right, so you can start voting now. All right. Oh,
Yeah, Caitlin, I made a mistake in trying to take one of my votes back. It
okay.
seems to keep adding it. Ugh, I'm an idiot. Sorry.
If you want to email me. Oh,
Oh, looks like I may have just done it. Hold on. Okay, great.
are we good?
It's a right
I'm
click, right?
good. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
figured it out. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So it looks like OAR received the most votes, and Melwood actually came in pretty high with 10. Does anyone have any comments on this before we move on to the last category? All right. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to send it back over to Jennifer.
So the last one is sort of our grab bag of all things. So there's a lot of public service under there. Should I quickly go through them? Is that helpful or? Can't
Maybe you
see
can
Yes,
anybody.
please.
highlight. About to say, maybe you can highlight the ones where there was huge discrepancy between staff and tax score.
Okay, and or the new ones, maybe I'll do that. So Just Neighbors, we've been funding for a number of years. They asked for a large increase. Northern Virginia Dental Clinic asked for a small increase. We've been funding them for a long time. LHAC, Legal Aid Justice Center, again, we've been funding for a long time. A new one was from Real Food for Kids, who, if you'll remember, we funded them for a COVID program. This is for a new program for a school-based SNAP ambassador, sort of training school staff to help people enroll in SNAP. ASPAN supportive housing project we've been funding for a number of years, so that's supportive housing in the Westover area. Arlington Neighborhood Village, this is a new proposal, although we had funded them before with AHIF, but this is asking for, again, sort of an ambassador outreach program. The Serrano Resident Services Program was a new sort of expanded resident services program that requested by AHC. IUTA's Legal Immigration Services, we've been funding for a number of years. They had a pretty significant increased request from 20 to 50,000. Fenwick Foundation, the Project Adapt is for dental care for low income, right? This is the dental one. Yes, low income people, older people. Wesley's Housing Stability Initiative is for their resident services program at Whitfield Commons, and they requested additional funding because it's also going to be expanding to the Cadence, which is their new property next door. BCE Virginia Cooperative Extension requested about the same for their financial education program that we've been funding for a number of years. So that's their Money Smart Pay and their kid program. So then the next four are all new. Arlington Thrive requested 50,000 for their Community Navigator program. So that was to have staff actually help navigate between different organizations and help do outreach in the community for people who might have high barriers or might not be aware of programs. APA requested 50,000 for its residents to start its resident services program at Terwilliger Place, which is a new property that opened this year. The Centro de Apoyo Familiar is a new program and requested funding for housing counseling and financial literacy, and there was also a homeownership counseling component to that. Hope One Source was again a new one, and that was the one that was trying to connect people to services through an app that they had designed. So any comments or feedback on any of those?
And just as a repeat from what has been said before, I mean, as much as residential services are important, when we're very fortunate and more buildings come online, we can't just keep funding positions of residential services. It will eat up all of the funding for all of the other programs. And so there's got to be another way to fund those positions, which are necessary and appropriate and needed. But we can't just be funding every new building that comes online.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what we've done with a lot of these is we fund them through AHIF, which is, as you all know, it's a 2-year grant. So for a lot of them, we're able to do that for 2 years, and then they're able to find the money to keep the staffing going. So that's sort of been how we've addressed that concern. Although we've been funding Wesley for a number of years under CDBG.
Yeah, I thought a number of them had been quite a while.
How many are in this category?
In total, there's 10.
There's 10 entities?
Are you asking for under the resident services specifically, or just to
No. Under this catch-all.
Never mind, I
category.
didn't count right. So 1, 2.
They're 15.
There's
Thanks, Brooke.
15?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, and you get 12 votes. This is a tough one.
Right. That's why I couldn't see the whole spreadsheet. So I was
Sorry,
like, okay, how discerning do I have to be?
Yes, sorry, I didn't. There we go. Hopefully I'll shrink it a little bit. There we go.
I'm particularly impressed by the Arlington Neighborhood Village. It's proposing to organize an ambassador program that could take quite a lot of weight off of the county staff and support it. Its basic goal is to get more people aware of the services. We have a lot of services, but most people don't know about them. This could have great impact in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was interesting that there were several that really were focusing on what you were mentioning, like kind of the connecting people to services and the community navigation. And I think that's something that we continue to hear. There's some great services, but if people don't know how to access them, that's a problem. So I think that one, the Thrive one, the Hope One Source, I think are all trying to kind of address that issue a little bit.
And can you all remind me that Centro de Apoyo Familiar, my scores are in line with what we see here, but I don't exactly remember why. Does someone have a thought on that? I suspect that maybe it was because it was a little bit unclear to me where the recipients of the services were coming from and how they were going to, get folks on their list to support, but I don't exactly remember.
I mean, for me, I think I know this organization, they're a really good organization. But I think some of the services seem duplicative to me. I mean, particularly they're really focused on home ownership counseling. And, I think LEDC has been doing that in the county for years. And so, do we need that as an additional service? It wasn't clear to me that was like we needed this as well, I think was kind of my concern about it.
Yes, the discussion that was had after the presentation did focus on that, the fact that they were duplicative of LADC. They didn't seem to bring anything different. So I think that was the general consensus.
Thanks.
Any other? So the Hope One source didn't score very highly for CIDSAC. Does anybody want to comment on what your thinking was?
Jennifer, can you remind me of that program again?
That was one where they have an app and their goal was to connect people through their app to existing county services.
Yeah, I
And
think.
Tim, you actually had some feedback on that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that one for me, if I remember correctly, these are the guys in DC, and
Yeah.
they came in and they had just zero knowledge of
Right.
our community, the people in our community, the organizations in our community that were already providing this. Like and I'm biased here, right? Like, so Path Forward, ACE-BAN, they do all of the outreach on behalf of the county to the homeless population. And this app was allegedly going to be linking homeless populations with services, and they had never even heard of Path Forward or ACE-BAN. They weren't working with us. And we have a contract with the county to do this exact service. So, I gave them a very low ranking because they didn't demonstrate that they had any knowledge, and their program is frankly duplicative. So that was my perspective. Yeah, I was opinionated on this one. That's why I wanted the reminder. So thank you.
Tim, could I ask though, as I recall, you also said you thought it was a legitimate technical application that perhaps could be used by Thrive and others, so that it wasn't that the technical application was bad, but it just should be part of the other organizations.
Did I say that? Oh man, I say a lot
Yeah.
of things, Steve. I don't know if you can
Yes.
believe everything I say. I'm just kidding. I'm joking.
I might have
No, I
made this
think
up
you're
in my head.
No. You're absolutely right. I agree with you 100%. There is utility, and this would be helpful. But if they had gone through the process of really vetting their capability and vetting the need, they would have come across some of these other organizations. And yeah, I think if they were to partner with a Thrive, or if they were to partner with Path Forward or New Hope or somebody like that, but they were working with APA, and APA is a housing provider. The people that are at APA are already in housing, but they want to work with an organization like Bridges, or really it's Path Forward who does all the outreach. That's who they want to work with. So yes, there's utility in the capability, but they weren't going about it properly. And I just, in good conscience, I can't recommend them for funding.
You were very insightful.
I don't hear that nearly enough, so thank you.
This category is interesting, and almost all the other ones, staff and CIDSAC, are very closely aligned. There's definitely a few differences here, but still pretty close, I think. Any other comments or questions?
Actually, now that you mentioned that, Jennifer, the financial education, the VCE program, there's quite a bit of difference on that one between staff and CIDSAC. I wonder if you guys have thoughts on why your score is lower.
I think for me, I think maybe for all of us, not to speak for all the other staff, but it's a great program. They have had trouble with performance the last couple of years, partly because of COVID, but they also they didn't submit reports. They didn't let us know they were having issues. So I think from my perspective, while the program is great, some of the sort of capacity performance stuff, I think might have knocked down my score a little bit. I don't know if other staff has any.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. That's my experience as well. It probably impacted my score.
Without COVID, it was doing a very credible and needed job.
Absolutely, it's a really important program, I think. But on the other hand, because we're the people who are looking at capacity and compliance and all that stuff too. So I don't know.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? Any other brilliant thoughts? Right.
All right, I'll get that set up. All right. Go ahead and start voting. All right. So I'm going to end the voting session. And this is how it shook out. So at least every program got at least one vote. And they're pretty evenly spread. So that is interesting. Does anyone have any final thoughts on this category or questions before we move on? And I can just give an update about next steps for the fiscal year 2024 Community Development Fund. All right, I'm not seeing anything. So just a quick reminder, I'm going to send out the final scores and you'll have that information. In terms of next steps, we really appreciate everyone scoring all the applications, participating in voting. It really helps us as we start to talk about putting a budget together and coming up with a funding recommendation. So we are going to start doing that in the next few weeks, and the budget recommendation that we develop is included in the county manager's 2024 budget proposal, which is released at the end of February. So you'll be seeing the recommendations in March, at the beginning of March, and we'll have the opportunity to kind of talk through, the recommendation that was put together. In terms of the next step after the budget is released, there is a budget hearing in March that we will that this information will be included in. It's a public hearing. Anyone can attend and provide testimony. The CITSAC meeting is also an opportunity for the public to come and provide comments on the recommendations. So there will be that opportunity as well. And then the board will then vote on the recommendations in April at their April meeting, which is at the end of April. And then once the recommendations are approved, the funds will be available on July 1st. So we're still kind of a long ways away from the fiscal year starting and programs being able to get going, but that is the schedule for how we will move forward. Does anyone have any questions about that before we move on? Or just general feedback, observations, comments? All right. Well, not hearing anything. I guess we can move on to staff member and chair reports. I actually don't have any staff reports. We've been we're at the end of our proposal review cycle, so we're kind of gearing up for the budget process. So there will be more updates as we move into the new year. I guess just a quick sort of logistical thing. Since this was a virtual meeting, we will have to meet in person in January. But I will obviously share those details with you towards the end of the month. Laura, did you have any chair reports?
Nothing for me, except I hope you all have safe fun, happy, healthy holidays in December.
I agree. All right, are there any member reports?
Just a second, the best wishes.
And I will third that, I guess. All right. Well, it looks like it's about 7:50, so how about we give everyone about 10 minutes back of their evening, and I look forward to seeing everyone in the new year, and happy holidays to everyone.
Merry Christmas, everyone. Happy New Year.
Thanks,
Happy
everyone.
holidays,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody.
Happy holidays.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, Jennifer.